There is a reason why certain relationships feel impossible to walk away from, even when they are clearly harmful. The reason is not always the grand gestures or even the history you share. More often, it's the words spoken over and over again that slip into your mind, echo in your self-doubt, and hold the bond of trauma tightly in place. Let's start here. Words are not just sounds. They are carriers of meaning, emotion, and identity. In a toxic relationship, words are weaponized. They become the very glue of the trauma bond. One common phrase you might hear is, "You're overreacting." This is a dismissal of your feelings, a way of saying your reality is invalid. Over time, you begin to question your own perceptions. You stop trusting yourself, and instead you lean more on the very person who is destabilizing you. That dependence deepens the bond. Another phrase, "No one will ever love you like I do." At first, it sounds like devotion. But underneath, it's a threat. It tells you that your chances of love, acceptance, or belonging outside this relationship are zero. It keeps you locked in fear, worried that leaving means loneliness. Then there's the subtle poison of, "I didn't mean it like that." This phrase is a masterclass in gaslighting. It rewrites the script, making you feel guilty for interpreting their hurtful words correctly. Instead of questioning them, you question yourself. And finally, we've been through so much together. That one tugs at history, loyalty, and nostalgia. It makes you overlook the pain in favor of the memory of the beginning. The good times, which only exist in fragments. It ties your future to a past that no longer reflects your reality. Now, why do these words matter so much? Because trauma bonds are not built on constant cruelty alone. They are built on the back and forth, moments of tenderness interrupted by words that wound, confuse, or trap. This pull keeps the nervous system hooked, waiting for relief, waiting for the good version of the person to reappear. The healing lies in naming these words, recognizing them not as truths, but as tactics. The moment you hear, "You're too sensitive," pause and remind yourself sensitivity is not weakness, it is awareness. The moment you hear, "No one will love you like I do," remind yourself that is control, not love. Every time you reclaim the meaning of these words, the bond weakens. Every time you see manipulation for what it is, the fog begins to lift. And every time you choose to value your truth over their script, you move one step closer to freedom. Because words can wound, but words can also heal. And the most powerful words you can speak are the ones you tell yourself, "I deserve better. I can see clearly. And I will no longer be defined by someone else's narrative." Language is one of the most powerful tools in human relationships, and within toxic or manipulative dynamics, it is rarely accidental. The words spoken are not random slips of the tongue. They are deliberate, strategic, and often rehearsed over time. When we talk about language as a tool of manipulation, we are looking at the way certain phrases are used to bend reality, create doubt, and establish control. In healthy relationships, words are meant to connect, to soothe, and to build trust. But in toxic relationships, words are repurposed. They become instruments that chip away at a person's sense of self, their confidence, and their ability to trust their own perspective. This is where the trauma bond finds its fuel. Imagine hearing the same dismissive line over and over again. "You're too sensitive." At first it might sting, but you brush it off. The second time, it plants a seed of doubt. "Maybe I do overact." By the 10th time, you start to silence yourself before you even speak, afraid you will once again be labeled too much. The phrase is no longer just about the situation at hand. It becomes a framework through which you view yourself. That's the power of language. It redefines your identity in ways that serve the manipulator, not you. Another example is when someone says, "I only said that because I love you." At first glance, it might sound tender, even caring, but the subtext is dangerous. It reframes cruelty, criticism, or even outright abuse as acts of love. The mind then begins to link pain with affection, creating confusion. This is one of the deepest layers of manipulation. When hurt and care become intertwined in your nervous system, the trauma bond strengthens because leaving feels like rejecting not just the pain, but the supposed love that came with it. Language as a tool of manipulation is also subtle in its unpredictability. One day you hear, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." The next, "No one else would ever put up with you." These contradictory statements destabilize your emotional ground. you begin to crave the first phrase and do everything possible to avoid the second. This is how control is maintained, not through constant negativity, but through the calculated use of alternating validation and degradation. The sweet words keep you holding on, while the harsh ones keep you small. It's important to understand that words used in this way are not only about controlling your feelings in the moment, they are about shaping your entire worldview. If someone repeatedly tells you that nobody else understands you the way I do, you start to see them as your only safe harbor, even when the relationship is stormy and destructive. The language closes doors in your mind, convincing you there are no other options, no other people who would accept or value you. The manipulation is not only emotional, it's cognitive, it narrows your reality. And the most devastating part is that these words eventually become internalized, long after the conversation is over, long after the relationship might even end. You may still hear that inner voice saying, "You're overreacting," or "Maybe no one else will ever love you." This is the residue of manipulation, the way language sticks, echoing in your own thoughts, shaping the way you see yourself and your place in the world. Recognizing this process is the first step toward breaking free. To see these words not as reflections of who you are, but as tools used against you, is to reclaim your perspective. The truth is that language only has power when we accept its meaning. Once you identify a phrase as manipulation, you begin to strip it of its influence. When you hear, "You're too sensitive," you can reframe its sensitivity as awareness, empathy, and depth. It is not a flaw. When you hear, "No one else will love you like I do," you can respond internally with the truth. Real love does not use fear as a leash. Language has been used to trap, but language can also set free. Speaking your own truths, affirming your worth, and consciously rejecting the manipulative narratives you've been fed are acts of resistance. Over time, the hold weakens. The same tool that once bound you can become the tool you use to liberate yourself. The cycle of hope and doubt is one of the most insidious elements of a trauma bond. It is not just the negative experiences that trap someone in a toxic relationship, but rather the unpredictable dance between cruelty and kindness, rejection and reassurance. Words play a central role in fueling this cycle. When affection is given in small, inconsistent doses and paired with devaluation, the nervous system becomes locked in a constant state of waiting for the next kind word, the next apology, the next glimpse of the good side of the person causing the harm. This dynamic keeps people tied to relationships that, logically, they know are destructive. Imagine being told one moment, "You mean everything to me," only to hear later in the same week, "You're such a disappointment." The human mind clings to the first phrase, to the warmth and promise it carries. The hurtful words create doubt, confusion, and pain, but the affectionate ones ignite hope that the relationship can return to that place of connection. This is not accidental. It is the very mechanism that makes trauma bonding so strong. The hope becomes the reward, the reason to stay, the justification for enduring the difficult times. The cycle is powerful because of its unpredictability. If someone were consistently cruel, leaving them would feel straightforward, even if painful. But when cruelty is mixed with moments of love or validation, the brain starts to link suffering with potential reward. In psychology, this is called intermittent reinforcement. It is the same principle used in gambling. You don't win every time, but the possibility that you might win keeps you playing. In toxic relationships, the jackpot is the fleeting moment of tenderness, the words that remind you of how things were in the beginning or how you wish they could be again. Hope is intoxicating. It tells you, maybe if I try harder, if I communicate better, if I'm more patient, the good version of this person will stay. Doubt creeps in when the harsh words return. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I don't deserve better. Maybe this is all my fault. The manipulator uses language to create both of these states. Words that promise a future together and words that tear down confidence. Together, they form the trap. A common example is hearing, "I love you, but you make it so hard." The "I love you" sparks hope. The "but" plants doubt. Another is, "You know I didn't mean it like that." This offers just enough reassurance to keep the hope alive, while still leaving the victim doubting their own interpretation. The back and forth prevents closure, keeps the person emotionally invested, and delays any decision to walk away. The body responds to this cycle too. During moments of kindness or validation, the brain releases feel-good chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin, strengthening attachment. When criticism or cruelty follows, stress hormones spike. The contrast makes the relief of kind words even more powerful the next time they appear. This biochemical roller coaster mirrors addiction. The person is hooked, not on the pain itself, but on the unpredictable bursts of comfort that follow it. Breaking free from this cycle begins with awareness. To recognize that the hope is manufactured, that it is strategically dangled like a carrot, is to see the mechanism clearly. Doubt only has power when it is unexamined. Once you notice the pattern, that the same words that wound you are followed by words that soothe you, you can begin to step back. You can remind yourself that genuine love does not require constant negotiation between pain and relief. It is natural to want to hold on to hope. It feels safer to believe that things can improve than to face the grief of letting go. But in a trauma bond, that hope is weaponized against you. The very words that lift you up are the same ones that keep you tethered to doubt. Healing means learning to separate the two, to accept that while the words of affection may sound beautiful, they lose their value when they are consistently paired with harm. True love and respect are steady, not conditional. They do not fluctuate based on how much control someone can maintain over you. And when you can hold on to that truth, the cycle of hope and doubt begins to lose its grip. Because once you see the pattern, you no longer wait for crumbs of kindness. You start to believe that you deserve the whole loaf. Consistent care, respect, and love that is not tangled in fear or confusion. When abuse or mistreatment becomes frequent, the mind naturally wants to resist it. Most people, when faced with cruelty, feel the urge to protest, to pull away, or to question what is happening. But in toxic dynamics, language is used as a silencing tool. It slowly conditions a person to accept what they once would have rejected. This is how words normalize abuse. By repeatedly minimizing, dismissing, or reframing harmful behavior, the manipulator teaches their partner to see mistreatment as ordinary or even as their own fault. Over time, what should never feel acceptable begins to feel like the new normal. One of the most common phrases that supports this conditioning is, "It's not a big deal." At first, the victim might push back. How can hurtful words, shouting, or betrayal not be a big deal? But after hearing it enough, the victim may begin to wonder if they are exaggerating, if perhaps they are making mountains out of molehills. This is the beginning of self-doubt. Another frequent phrase is, "You're too sensitive." With repetition, it teaches the person that their natural emotional reactions are flawed, that their pain is unreasonable, and that their role in the relationship is to tolerate more and feel less. This is the slow drip of normalization. A cruel comment is brushed aside as just a joke. Broken promises are excused with, "I was stressed. You know how I get." Episodes of rage are followed by, "If you didn't push my buttons, I wouldn't lose my temper." The problem is always minimized, rationalized, or shifted back onto the victim. After enough cycles of this, the victim learns not to expect accountability, not to ask for change, and not to believe that their discomfort is valid. Silence becomes a form of survival. The danger of normalization is that it redefines what love and partnership are supposed to look like. When someone is told again and again that their needs are unreasonable, they begin to lower their standards. What once would have felt shocking, being insulted, controlled, or ignored, eventually feels routine. The abuse hides in plain sight because the language around it strips it of its weight. This is just how relationships are. The victim starts to think, everyone has problems. What they don't realize is that they've been trained to settle for far less than they deserve. Another layer of this manipulation is the use of comparison. Phrases like, "Other people would have left you by now," or "You're lucky I put up with you," twist the narrative so that the victim believes their abuser is doing them a favor. Instead of seeing the relationship as harmful, they start to see themselves as burdensome, convinced that no one else would stay. This deepens dependence and makes the thought of leaving terrifying. Abuse feels like a distorted form of safety because it has been reframed as tolerance or loyalty. Over time, the victim may even start repeating these dismissive phrases to themselves. When they feel hurt, they silence their own voice. "I'm just too sensitive. I shouldn't make a big deal out of this." The abuser's words become internalized, playing on repeat in the victim's mind long after the conversation ends. This is how normalization embeds itself not only in the relationship, but in the very way the victim sees themselves and interprets the world. The tragedy is that the person being hurt begins to carry the burden of responsibility for the relationship. They question their own reactions instead of questioning the mistreatment. They lower their expectations instead of demanding respect. They shrink themselves to fit into the small space they are allowed, forgetting that relationships are meant to be expansive, supportive, and nurturing. Recognizing normalization is a crucial step in breaking the trauma bond. The phrases may sound casual, even harmless, but their impact is profound. Once you can see you're too sensitive, not as feedback, but as a tactic, you can start to reclaim your truth. Once you can name it's not a big deal as a dismissal, you can remind yourself that your feelings are valid. And once you can challenge the idea that everyone goes through this, you begin to realize that healthy relationships do not thrive on minimizing pain. They thrive on empathy, accountability, and respect. The process of normalizing abuse is not easy. It means retraining the mind to believe what it once doubted, that your perspective is real, your pain matters, and your needs are legitimate. It means noticing when dismissive words appear and choosing not to accept them as the final word. And most of all, it means raising your standards again, remembering that love does not excuse cruelty, that care does not belittle, and that true intimacy never requires you to silence yourself. Breaking the spell of words is one of the most empowering yet difficult steps in healing from a trauma bond. For so long, the words spoken in a toxic relationship act like a script, lines repeated until they become internal truths. You'll never find anyone better. You're imagining things. I love you more than anyone else ever could. These phrases work like chains, each link forged by repetition, fear, and self-doubt. The bond holds not because the relationship is healthy, but because the words have been given the power to shape your reality. To break free is to recognize that these words were never truths, but tools of control. The spell works because words carry authority. When someone you love, admire, or depend on speaks them, they hit deeper. You want to believe them, even when they hurt, because love makes us vulnerable to suggestion. That vulnerability gets exploited when the words are manipulative. Over time, the line between who you are and who they tell you that you are begins to blur. If you are told repeatedly that you are too needy, too dramatic, or too unlovable, those statements start to feel like facts. This is why the bond feels unbreakable, because it is not just about leaving a person, it is about leaving behind a version of yourself that their words have created. Breaking the spell begins with awareness. It means slowing down enough to notice the words when they surface and asking, is this actually true, or is it a tactic? Take, for example, the phrase, no one else will put up with you. At face value, it is a threat disguised as certainty. It suggests abandonment is inevitable if you leave. But pause and examine it closely. Is it really true that no one else would value you? Or is it simply a phrase designed to scare you into staying? The moment you see it as manipulation, its power diminishes. Another step in breaking the spell is reframing. When you hear, you're too sensitive, you can answer internally with, sensitivity is not weakness. It is empathy, intuition, and depth. When you hear, you're imagining things, you remind yourself, my perception is valid, and my feelings are real. Each time you reframe, you reclaim your identity. You stop allowing their words to define you and begin to speak new truths over yourself. But breaking the spell is not only about rejecting their words, it is also about creating new ones. Affirmations like, I deserve respect, my needs are valid, and love is not supposed to hurt act as counterspells. They may feel awkward at first, especially if the negative words have been ingrained for years, but repetition works both ways. Just as harmful words can wound deeply through repetition, healing words can also rebuild when spoken consistently. Over time, your inner dialogue begins to change, and with it, the bond loses its hold. It's also important to remember that silence can be part of the spell. In toxic relationships, what is not said, the lack of apology, the absence of accountability, the refusal to acknowledge your pain, can be just as binding as the words that are spoken. Breaking the spell means naming the silence too, and refusing to let it erase your experience. You do not need someone else's acknowledgement to validate your reality. Ultimately, breaking the spell of words is about reclaiming your narrative. Instead of living by the script that was handed to you, you begin to write your own. The trauma bond weakens when you stop waiting for their version of love to be enough and start believing that real love is built on mutual respect and care. The words that once trapped you become easier to spot, easier to challenge, and eventually easier to dismiss. The freedom comes not in forgetting the words, but in refusing to be ruled by them. You can remember what was said without letting it define you. You can recognize manipulation without giving it power. And most importantly, you can replace the old script with one that speaks to your strength, your resilience, and your worth. Because while words once bound you, it will be your own words, spoken with clarity and conviction, that finally set you free.